Good morning, church. Today, Pastor Peter Chen will share the message from Isaiah chapter 9, verses 2 to 7. I'll read in Luganda and Megan will read in English. Hear the word of the Lord. Abantu abatambulira mu kizikiza balabye omusana mungi. Abo abaatuulanga mu nsi ey'ekizikiza ky'okufa, omusana gubaakidde bo. Oyinzizza eggwanga, oyongedde ku ssanyu lyabwe. Basanyukira mu maaso go ng'essanyu bwe liri ery'omu makungula. Abasajja nga bwe basanyuka nga bagereka omunyago. Kubanga ekkoligo ekyamuzitoowererwa n'omuggo ogw'oku kibegaabega kye lwe luga lw'omujoozi we. Obimenya nga ku lunaku lwa Midiyaani.
The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. You have enlarged the nation and increased their joy. They rejoice before you as people rejoice at the harvest, as warriors rejoice when dividing the plunder. For as in the day of Midian's defeat, you have shattered the yoke that burdens them, the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor.
Kubanga ebyokulwanyisa byonna ebyoyo alina ebyokulwanyisa mu lyogaano, n'ebyambalo ebikulaakulanyizibwa mu musaayi, biriba byakwokebwa okuba enku ez'omuliro. Kubanga omwana atuzaalibwa ffe, omwana ow'obulenzi aweereddwa ffe, n'okufuga kunaabanga ku kibegaabega kye. N'erinnya lye liyitibwa ow'ekitalo. Ateesa ebigambo, Katonda ow'amaanyi, Kitaffe ataggwaawo, Omukulu ow'emirembe. Okufuga kwe n'emirembe tebirikoma kweyongeranga ku ntebe ya Dawudi ne ku bwakabaka bwe okunywezebwa, n'obuwanirira n'omusango n'obutuukirivu okuva leero n'emirembe n'emirembe. Obunyiikivu bwa Mukama ow'eggye bulituukirizibwa ekyo.
Every warrior's boot used in battle and every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning, will be fuel for the fire. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. And he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. This is the word of the Lord.
All right, good morning, everyone. We're continuing on with a sermon series. We're looking at names. I've been using names as a way to explore who God is, but also our own identity and some important issues. We're going to continue that same sermon series, but this time with a focus on Advent. And we're looking at the 4 names of Jesus that are talked about in the book of Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6. And this is a prophecy that Isaiah is giving about the coming of Jesus, where it says this: "For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, and Prince of Peace." And so throughout these next weeks during Advent, we'll be talking about each of these titles, each of these names of God, of Jesus, in order to explore and understand Jesus a little better. And we wanted to start off today by talking about this first title, which is Wonderful Counselor, that Jesus is described as this wonderful counselor. And the question I think we have to start off with as we think about what this means, that Jesus is a wonderful counselor, is to ask the simple question: what does it mean now to have a wonderful counselor? When you're talking about with your friends, your family, or whatever, what comes to your mind when you think about you having a wonderful counselor? Because I think what we might be thinking may be a little different from what was intended back in the time of Isaiah. And it's good for us to kind of just be honest about that and to question what is the difference between how we might say it now versus how Isaiah might have meant it all the time ago. And I think what we have to admit is that for many of us, having a wonderful counselor means having found a trusted mental health professional. Right? I think that's most of us when we say, I have a wonderful counselor. You say, what's their number? Because I'd like to have a wonderful counselor too. There's not enough wonderful counselors out there for all of us. And so I think oftentimes that is how we interpret and think about this term, this title for Jesus as a wonderful counselor. We think a wonderful counselor is this trained professional who listens well, who helps us to identify our feelings, gives us strategies to face some of the issues that we're facing in our lives. And that's what we think about when we think about having a wonderful counselor. And so when we read this in Isaiah chapter 9, I think that's a temptation to think, Jesus is my wonderful counselor. What's his telephone number? What are his hours? And we can kind of have that same understanding of Jesus that comes very naturally out of what we think a wonderful counselor is here and now. But is that really what Isaiah means when he uses this phrase, wonderful counselor? Is it the same that we have when we think about this phrase? In order to understand that, I think it's helpful to look at the actual Hebrew, to look at the words that he chooses to use, to understand them in the way that he would have understood them in the book of Isaiah. And so I want to start off by looking at that first word, which is the term counselor, or in the Hebrew, it's this word yalatz. And in order to understand this better, there's a passage in 2 Corinthians 25 that uses this word yalatz, or a verb form of it, multiple times. And so it's really helpful for us to kind of be transported like a time machine back in order to understand what that word really meant to Isaiah. And this is what it says in 2 Chronicles 25. This is an argument between the king of Israel in the north and the king of Judah to the south. And it says this: "While he was still speaking, the king said to him, 'Have we appointed you an advisor to the king?'" That's that word, yalatz. "Stop. Why be struck down?" So the prophet stopped, but said, "I know that God has determined," same word, "to destroy you because you have done this and have not listened to my counsel." After Amaziah, king of Judah, consulted his advisors, he sent this challenge to Joash, son of Jehoaz, the son of Jehu, king of Israel: "Come, let us face each other in battle." And so when you read this passage from 2 Chronicles 25, which uses that word counselor over and over again, it gives us a little better understanding of how Isaiah would have understood this. And a couple of things I want to point out is that in the Old Testament, counselors were those who advised and directed kings. That's what a counselor would do. And we see that in today's passage. It talks about an advisor to the king, or Amaziah consulting his advisors. These counselors would tell kings what to do, and kings wouldn't move or do anything until they talked to these advisors first. And so right away, we get a clearer understanding of what this word would have meant in the Old Testament. But even another sense of this is to understand that in the Old Testament, yalatz could also be translated directly as to determine or to plan something. In verse 16a, it says, "So the prophet stopped and said, 'I know that God has determined or planned to destroy you.'" It's the same word as that word for counsel. And so right away, when we read just this short passage from 2 Chronicles, we get a clear sense of what that word counselor meant to Isaiah in the Old Testament and in the Hebrew. In the Old Testament, the word counselor is more authoritative than how we might use it today. It is a person with real authority, one who directs kings, or one who determines. And so it's different then from how we might say it, right? We think about counselors as people who listen and may give us advice. It's not exactly what they were thinking in the Old Testament. It was someone who directed kings and told them what to do, someone who planned and determined things instead. I think this then gives us a clear understanding of what Isaiah is talking about when Isaiah says that Jesus is our wonderful counselor. What does it mean for Jesus to be a counselor? When Jesus is called a counselor, he is more than one who listens and gives advice. He is one who commands and determines. I think there is a common tendency for us as people who are in control of so many things. We can control our lights. We can turn on things and turn off things. We have so much control over our lives that we often take that same sense of control and ownership and we place it upon Jesus. And Jesus becomes very close to just an advisor for us of, Jesus, tell me what you might think is best. I'll make the decision, because I'm in control of my life, but you can help me. You give me some advice on what I should be doing instead. And counselor might reinforce that. If we might think about counselor in this modern kind of language, that might affirm that for us and say, yes, Jesus helps me. He puts a rubber stamp on anything I want to do. He just says, go ahead and do it. Because that's what a good counselor does. But that's not what this word means. This word is stronger. This word advises kings and tells kings what to do. This word plans and determines instead. And I think it's an important corrective for us that we wouldn't dilute the identity of Jesus in our lives. That we wouldn't make him into someone who just gives us advice when we want it from him. But we remember what Jesus himself says in Luke chapter 6:46. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I say? And so I think this is an important corrective for us. When we hear Jesus being called a counselor, we shouldn't think about it in this modern day understanding. And this is no insult to counseling and to therapy or anything like that. But just this understanding, that's not exactly what Jesus is. Jesus is one who has authority, who determines, who plans, doesn't just give advice. And I think it's very important for us to remember. And that's what Isaiah is telling us here in Isaiah chapter 9. But there's more to this because there's another adjective that's used here, and it's the word wonderful, or the word pele in the Hebrew. Before we get into the Hebrew, I just wanted to talk about how we understand that word even as people who speak English. Because for most of us, the modern definition of wonderful is just another variation of good. Right? You think about it, right? If someone asks you how your day was, you could say, it was good. Or you could say, it was great. Or you could say, it was wonderful. It's just the same word. It's just like when you turn it up a little bit. Or if you have a meal and it was good, you say it was good. If it was even better, you would say wonderful. That's just it's one generic word that describes something that is better than average. It is one of those words that we pick. When you really think about it, though, when you look at that word and you kind of tease it apart, that's not what wonderful means, does it? Wonderful means to be filled with wonder. And that's what the Old English definition of wonderful actually meant. It meant marvelous thing, miracle, object of astonishment. When we use the word wonderful, it'd be something that's a miracle that's happening. Something that's wondrous that we can't see very often in our lives. That's the time we would say, I am filled with wonder. So next time you have a meal that fills you with wonder, then you can say it's wonderful. Otherwise, just say tasty or appetizing or something more precise. But wonderful is a different word when you really think about it. That's exactly what that Hebrew word pele means as well. And we can get a really good sense of it from the book of Psalms, chapter 77, where it says this. I will remember the deeds of the Lord. Yes, I will remember your miracles. It's translated as miracles of long ago, that same word for wonderful. I will consider all your works and meditate on all your mighty deeds. Your ways, God, are holy. What God is as great as our God? You are the God who performs miracles. You display your power among the peoples. That's what that word wonderful means. Wonderful in Isaiah chapter 9 doesn't mean good or great. It is more accurately translated as matchless, miraculous, and one of a kind. And so again, we get a different understanding of what this phrase means when he says a wonderful counselor. He's not saying better than average, good, not bad. That's not what wonderful means. Wonderful means nothing like it. There is nothing like this counselor that we have. It fills me with wonder to think about this counselor. Matchless, peerless, one of a kind, wondrous. That's what he's trying to say with this word wonderful. So what does it mean then when you put these two words together? We have this word counselor, right? This Old Testament advisor who would tell kings what to do. And then we have this word wonderful, which means miraculous, matchless, peerless. And I think when you put them together, what I take away from this phrase, this term of Jesus is this. Wonderful counselor tells us that Jesus is like a storied Old Testament advisor, but even that falls short of who Jesus truly is. I think that word counselor is, like I said, an important corrective, that we don't get into this modern day understanding of Jesus as being a respected, nice guy that gives us moral advice that I may or may not take. I think that's really important, that we understand that word counselor for what it's really worth, that he's more like this Old Testament advisor or prophet. But even that's not enough. Even that does not describe Jesus. Even if we could see Jesus in the way that Isaiah did, that would not be able to describe him. Even that term, Ya'atz, is not enough to know who Jesus is. He is a matchless counselor, unlike any prophet who had come before him. And I think what this does is that this invites us into a different way of approaching the Advent season. And it addresses something that I think many of us feel, and that is the danger of Advent apathy. Advent apathy. Think about it for a second. How many Christmases or Advents have you been a part of or celebrated in your life so far? A dozen, maybe for some of you young kids in the back, 12 Christmases. For some of the young adults, maybe 24 Christmases. For the older adults, 3 or 4 dozen, 5, 6, 7, some of us in this room, legitimately, dozens of Christmases or Advents that we have celebrated. And once you celebrate something that many dozens of times, there is a tendency for us to just feel like, yeah, I get it. How could I not understand Christmas by now? I understand Christmas. I understand who Jesus was. I understand the stories because I've heard them 5, 6 dozens of times at this point. And oftentimes we come to Advent with this sense of, I know this. I know this season. I know the holiday. And I know the God who comes with it. And I think this often can become our approach when we enter into the Advent season, a sense of comfort, a sense of reliability, but also a sense that we get this already. We get who God is, and we understand what's being taught to us. But I think this wonderful counselor phrase is an invitation for us to think about it differently. That Advent is an invitation for us to put aside what we think we know of God and to perceive him anew. That's what that word wonderful counselor means. It says, no, he's not this modern counselor. He's something ancient that advised kings, but even better than that. Older, bigger, more complex, and deeper than you think Jesus truly is. Think about even the story of Jesus' birth, this understanding that we know God as this mighty God who would come as a child in the most humble form to be amongst us. That Advent is definitely this invitation for each of us to put aside what we think we know about God and to look at God, to look at Jesus in a new way. And that's my invitation to us as we start this Advent season, is to kind of drop what we think we know about God, to drop this perception. I understand this season. I understand everything there is to know about God, and to come with this attitude instead. God, I want to know you anew. I want to know things about you that I didn't know. I want to be shocked by who you are in my life, to have a truly Advent-oriented focus during this season.